The kind of morning that makes Charlotte feel alive hits different in early spring. The air carries that crisp edge off the Catawba River, light bouncing hard off the glass towers downtown, and the streets around the South End Financial District are already humming with the quiet confidence of money in motion. Andre Carter pulled his truck into the parking lot of Crown Elite Motors at exactly 8:57 in the morning, 3 minutes early. He always arrived 3 minutes early. Not 2, not 5, 3. His father had taught him that. Early enough to show you care, the old man used to say. Not so early that you make the other person feel rushed. The truck was a 2019 Ford F-250, midnight black, clean as a surgical table. The toolbox bolted to the bed had a small dent on the left corner from a job in Nashville 2 years back, and Andre had decided to leave it there. A reminder, he told himself, that even the best work leaves marks. He sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the building. Crown Elite Motors was the kind of place that made regular people feel slightly underdressed just by driving past it. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, showroom lit like a jewelry store. Bentleys and Aston Martins and Porsches positioned like sculptures on white pedestals behind spotless windows. A fountain ran at the entrance, which Andre thought was a bit much for a car dealership. But then again, he had never been in the business of selling the idea of wealth. He was in the business of making sure the machines that wealth bought actually worked. He stepped out of the truck and smoothed the front of his uniform. Blue coveralls, the kind he had worn every working day since he opened Carter Performance Engineering 11 years ago. His name was embroidered on the left chest in white thread, faded slightly from 2,000 washings. Underneath the name, the company logo. He had designed it himself, a stylized gear and a wrench crossed like a coat of arms, and he was quietly proud of it in the way that men are proud of things they built from nothing. He grabbed his leather portfolio from the passenger seat. Inside it were 47 pages of technical proposals, maintenance cost projections, and engineering assessments he had spent the last 3 weeks preparing. He had been contacted 6 weeks ago by the executive team at Crown Elite about a potential partnership. The email had been formal and precise. They were interested in bringing Carter Performance Engineering on as the official technical partner for their Southeast region. The scope of the project, the email had suggested, was substantial. Andre had not told anyone at his shop yet. He did not want to celebrate something that had not happened. He walked toward the entrance with the easy gait of a man completely comfortable in his own skin. The automatic doors slid open, and the smell of the showroom hit him first. Leather, climate-controlled air, the faint ghost of high-octane fuel that every serious automotive space carries even when it is spotless. He stepped inside and paused, as any reasonable person would, to look around. The showroom was stunning. He would give them that. A midnight blue Rolls-Royce Ghost sat on the central platform under a single column of warm light. Beside it, a McLaren 720s in a shade of orange that had no right to be as beautiful as it was. Against the far wall, a row of Porsche 911s in gradient shades from silver to obsidian. Andre was looking at the McLaren when a shadow moved at the edge of his peripheral vision. "Excuse me." The voice was firm and carried the particular authority of someone who believed their presence was the most important thing in any given room. Andre turned. The man approaching him wore a dark uniform with a silver badge that read, Crown Elite Security above his name. Kevin Lawson. Built like a former college linebacker, jaw set, eyes doing that professional assessment sweep that trained security personnel learn and then never quite stop doing even off the clock. "Service entrance is around the back," Kevin said. He did not phrase it as a question. "Customers aren't allowed in the showroom in work clothes." Andre looked at him calmly. "I have a meeting scheduled this morning, 9 o'clock with Richard Coleman." Kevin's expression did not shift. "You have an appointment with the CEO. That is correct?" A beat of silence that lasted just a fraction too long. "Sir," Kevin said, and the word had a particular weight to it, the kind of weight that comes not from respect but from practiced professional distance. "I'm going to need you to step outside. You can wait by the service entrance and we'll send someone to verify." "I can verify right now," Andre said. He reached into his portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper. The email confirmation printed clean with the Crown Elite letterhead at the top. He held it toward Kevin without drama, without aggression, the way you'd hand someone a boarding pass. Kevin looked at it without taking it. Then, he looked back at Andre, then at the showroom behind them, where two couples browsing near a Bentley had paused to observe the interaction with the barely concealed curiosity of people who tell themselves they are not watching, when they absolutely are. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the showroom floor. You can wait outside and someone will come get you if the appointment is confirmed." Andre held Kevin's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, he made a calculation that men like him have been making their entire lives. A rapid, exhausting, quietly devastating calculation about what the moment costs versus what it is worth. About whether the argument that is yours to win is worth the energy of winning it. He put the paper back in his portfolio. He nodded once, a small, contained nod that communicated nothing except that he had heard and that he was choosing his response deliberately. "All right," Andre said, quietly, evenly, and he walked back out through the doors into the spring morning. Noah Parker, the youngest salesperson on the floor, had watched the whole exchange from behind a desk near the McLaren. He was 27 years old and 2 months into this job, and there was something in his stomach right now that felt like the beginning of a bad feeling he was not yet experienced enough to fully name. He looked at Emily Ross, the operations manager, who had been walking past when it happened, and had stopped and watched the entire thing. Emily was already on her phone, but it was too late to stop what had already started. Outside, Andre walked to his truck. He set his portfolio on the hood, leaned against the grill, and looked up at the sky. Charlotte's sky in April was a particular kind of blue, deep and clear, with high, thin clouds moving slowly from the northwest. He breathed in, breathed out. His jaw was tight and he consciously released it. He was not angry, or rather, he was managing something that, if left unattended, could become anger, and he chose not to let it. This was not the first time. It would not be the last. And the question he always asked himself in these moments was not why, but what now. He reached for his keys. The executive elevator at Crown Elite Motors opened on the ground floor at 9:02, and Richard Coleman walked out into the showroom at a pace that people who knew him recognized immediately. Not a run, not quite, but faster than his usual measured stride. The walk of a man who is very nearly late and knows it and does not like the feeling at all. Richard was 58. With silver hair he kept short, and a jawline that suggested he had been handsome in his 40s and had since graduated into something more accurately described as distinguished. He wore a navy suit, no tie, because the office memo he had written 3 years ago said the company's dress code was business casual, and he believed, genuinely, that a leader who could not follow his own rules had no right to make them. He had built Crown Elite from one showroom in Raleigh to 14 locations across the Southeast in 22 years. He did it by being right more often than he was wrong, by surrounding himself with people smarter than him in their specific disciplines, and by knowing, with the clarity of hard experience, that the single greatest business mistake a person could make was to confuse appearance with competence. He had been in meetings since 7:30. His assistant had reminded him twice about the 9 o'clock. He was 2 minutes past it, and he was moving. He stepped into the showroom and looked around for a man he had only seen in a photograph, a press photo from an article in Automotive Engineering Quarterly 2 years back. A black man in a blue uniform standing next to a restored Ferrari 250 GTO that he had brought back from near ruin, grinning with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who loves their work and is excellent at it. He did not see him. He scanned the room again. 2 couples near the Bentley, a young salesperson near the McLaren, who seemed to be avoiding eye contact. Emily Ross walking toward him with an expression he did not like. "Has anyone seen Mr. Andre Carter?" Richard asked the room. The question landed in the showroom like a stone in still water. The silence that followed was not the silence of no one knowing the answer. It was the silence of everyone knowing and no one wanting to be the one to say it. Emily stepped forward. She had been in operations management for 6 years, and had developed a reliable instinct for the exact size and shape of the problem she was currently walking into. This one was large. "Mr. Coleman," she said, keeping her voice level. "Security just escorted him outside." Richard looked at her. "Andre Carter, the CEO of Carter Performance Engineering. The man we've been trying to get a meeting with for 3 months. That man." "Yes, sir." The change in Richard Coleman's face was not dramatic. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. The change was smaller and more serious than that. A compression around the eyes, a tightening of the mouth, the expression of a man doing precise internal math about a situation and not liking the sum. He turned and walked toward the front entrance. Fast. Kevin Lawson, standing near the security desk, saw the direction Richard was headed, and felt the particular sensation of a man who has just realized that the decision he made 3 minutes ago was catastrophically wrong. He started to speak. Richard walked past him without acknowledgement. The automatic doors slid open, and Richard stepped out into the April morning. Andre Carter was at his truck. He had his keys in his hand. He was not running. He was not making any kind of statement. He was simply leaving, with the quiet dignity of a man who has decided that his time and his energy are not available for situations that do not deserve them. "Mr. Carter." Andre stopped. He turned. Richard Coleman was crossing the parking lot toward him, at something close to a jog. One hand slightly raised in the universal gesture of wait. "Please wait." Andre watched him come. His expression was still and open, the way a man looks when he has already processed the emotion of a situation, and is now simply present in the moment that follows. Richard stopped in front of him. He was slightly out of breath, less from the physical distance, and more from the weight of what he was carrying. "I am Richard Coleman," he said, "and I owe you an apology. On behalf of this company, right now, before anything else, I am sorry." Andre looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, in the way that people look at each other when they are trying to determine whether what they are hearing is genuine or performance. What he saw was genuine. "I appreciate that," Andre said. His voice was even, unhurried, the voice of a man who had decided long ago that his response to disrespect would never be disrespect in return. "Will you come back inside?" Richard asked. "Please. The meeting room is ready, the team is assembled, and I can tell you that what happened out here is being addressed. But none of that matters right now. What matters is that you are the person we asked to be here today, and you deserve to be treated accordingly." A long beat passed between them. The fountain at the entrance murmured. A car moved slowly through the parking lot behind them. Andre looked at the building, then at Richard. Then, with the smallest of nods, he picked up his portfolio from the hood of the truck. "All right," he said. "Let's go talk." They walked back across the parking lot together. Richard held the door, not in a performative way, not with any kind of theatrical gesture, simply the way one man holds a door for another man he has just asked a favor of. Inside the showroom, every employee who had seen what happened earlier was watching. The two couples near the Bentley had no context for what was occurring, but sensed enough to pay attention. Noah Parker, the young salesperson, exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. Kevin Lawson stood at his post near the security desk and felt, in the marrow of his bones, the particular misery of a man who acted from habit and instinct, and failed to ask the one question that would have changed everything. "What is your name?" Emily Ross fell into step beside Richard and Andre as they moved toward the executive elevator. She had already sent a message to the meeting room to let them know the meeting was back on. The elevator doors closed, and the showroom settled back into its usual ambient hum, but with something altered in it now. Some quality of the air itself changed, as though everyone in the room had just witnessed something they would be thinking about for a long time. The conference room on the 4th floor of Crown Elite Motors had a view that Richard Coleman had paid specific attention to when they redesigned the executive floor 3 years ago. From the north-facing windows you could see uptown Charlotte in its entirety, the Bank of America Corporate Center rising above everything else, the Spectrum Center catching morning light, and beyond that, the neighborhood spreading out in every direction, Dilworth and South End and Myers Park, the whole geography of a city that had spent the last 2 decades becoming something much larger than it had been. He had put that view there on purpose. He wanted every meeting that happened in this room to happen with that view as the backdrop, because he believed that context mattered, that decisions made in sealed rooms with no connection to the outside world tended to be smaller and more self-regarding than decisions made with the evidence of consequence visible through the glass. Andre Carter sat at the conference table and opened his portfolio. Across from him sat the assembled executive team of Crown Elite Motors. Helen Brooks, the director of finance, with her reading glasses on a chain, and the particular alertness of a woman who processes numbers the way other people process words. Marcus Webb, the VP of operations, who had spent 15 years at BMW North America before coming to Crown Elite, and who was, of all the people in the room, the one most likely to actually understand what Andre was about to show them. Danielle Chu, Director of Digital Strategy, young and quiet and extremely precise, and Emily Ross, who had positioned herself near the door with a coffee that she was not drinking, observing. Richard sat at the head of the table and made the introduction that should have happened 45 minutes ago in the showroom lobby. This is Andre Carter. He's the founder and chief engineer of Carter Performance Engineering, based here in Charlotte. Before I say anything more, I want to let Andre speak. He's prepared a technical presentation, and I've already read the summary he sent over last week, and I can tell you that what he's built and what he's proposing is unlike anything I've seen in this segment. Andre. He gestured toward the room. Andre nodded once, the same small, contained nod from the parking lot, and then he began. He did not use a slide deck. He had one on his laptop, prepared, available, but he had learned over the years that the most effective presentations he gave were the ones where he started by talking and only reached for visual aids when the conversation required specificity. People trusted the voice before they trusted the screen. He started with the problem. The European performance vehicle segment has a maintenance crisis, he said. It's not a secret in the industry. The complexity of modern high-performance cars, the diagnostic technology, the proprietary calibration systems, the integration between mechanical and electronic components has outpaced the training and tooling of most dealership service departments, including, with respect, most of the service departments in networks like this one. Helen Brooks looked up from her notepad. The result, Andre continued, is that owners of vehicles in this segment, your customers, are regularly taking their cars to independent specialists for work that the dealership cannot perform. You're losing service revenue to shops like mine. Across a network the size of Crown Elite's Southeast portfolio, based on the numbers I was able to pull from industry reports and what I could project from public data, that's a service revenue gap in the range of $12 to $18 million annually. Conservative estimate. Marcus Webb leaned forward slightly. What's your basis for that estimate? Andre opened his portfolio and slid a document across the table. 3 years of data from the Automotive Service Association's regional performance benchmarks, cross-referenced against labor rate data from NADA, and supplemented with the diagnostic billing patterns I've tracked from clients who were originally dealership customers before they came to us. I can walk through the methodology in detail if you'd like. Marcus picked up the document. His expression, which had been the practiced neutral of a man who sees a lot of presentations, shifted to something more genuinely engaged. Andre gave him a moment, then continued. What Carter Performance Engineering offers is not just a service agreement. It's an infrastructure upgrade. We would embed our diagnostic and calibration systems into your service departments. We would train your existing technicians. We would provide direct technical support from our engineering team for any job that exceeds your current capacity. And we would handle the highest complexity work, the restoration projects, the performance builds, the competition prep work, at our facility with full documentation provided back to you for every vehicle. Daniel Chu, who had been quiet, looked up. You're talking about a full operational integration. That's right, Andre said. That's a significant undertaking on both sides. It is, Andre agreed. It is not a simple contract. It is a partnership, which is why the terms I've outlined are structured as a long-term arrangement. I'm not interested in a one-year pilot. If we do this, we do it properly, and we do it for long enough that both organizations can actually realize the value of the relationship. Helen Brooks had been writing steadily. She looked up. What is your current annual revenue at Carter Performance? 7.8 million last year, Andre said. Margin of 31%. We have 16 full-time engineers and technicians, 4 of whom hold advanced certifications from Ferrari, McLaren, and Porsche directly. We service clients across 12 states. A quiet settled over the room that was different from the earlier silence in the showroom. This was the silence of people recalibrating their assessment of someone, of running new numbers against old assumptions and finding that the old assumptions were badly, significantly wrong. Emily Ross, near the door, allowed herself the smallest of satisfied exhales. Richard Coleman sat very still and watched his team. He had known all of this, had spent 3 weeks reviewing Andre's background before agreeing to the meeting, which was why the incident downstairs had carried such a particular weight. But watching the rest of his executives encounter this information in real time, watching the calibration happen in their expressions, was its own kind of instruction. Marcus Webb set down the document he had been reading and looked at Andre directly. You said you service clients across 12 states. Who are your biggest accounts currently? Andre listed 4 names. By the time he reached the third, Daniel Chu had opened his laptop. By the time he reached the 4th, Marcus Webb was already on his phone. Helen Brooks removed her reading glasses from their chain, put them on, and looked at the financial projections in the packet that Andre had placed in front of each of them. She was quiet for a while, moving through pages. Then she said without looking up, "These maintenance cost reductions. You're projecting a 38% reduction in per-vehicle service costs for the European segment in year 2. Correct?" Andre said. "Walk me through the primary driver of that reduction." Diagnostic precision, Andre said. The majority of wasted cost in high-performance European vehicle service is misdiagnosis, not because the technicians aren't skilled, because the tools aren't calibrated for the software generation of the vehicles. We're talking about cars where the ECU, transmission control module, and active suspension system are communicating on protocols that require specific access codes and calibration sequences that change with each model year update. If you don't have current access, you're guessing. Guessing costs money. Our diagnostic suite is updated quarterly through direct agreements with 3 of the 5 manufacturers your network carries. We stopped the guessing. Helen Brooks took off her glasses and looked at him over the top of the document. "Mr. Carter, how long have you been doing this?" "Officially, 11 years, Andre said. "Before that, I was doing it in my uncle's garage in Gastonia while I was finishing my engineering degree." A brief pause. "I was rebuilding Ferraris when I was 22, he said, not with pride exactly, but with the matter-of-fact accuracy of someone stating a verifiable fact. I just didn't have a business card yet." Richard Coleman smiled, very slightly, and said nothing. The lunch break that Richard called at 12:15 was both practical and strategic. Practical because the meeting had been going for nearly 2.5 hours, and the coffee was gone, and 3 people in the room had an afternoon of other obligations. Strategic because Richard had spent enough years in negotiation to know that the most productive thing you can sometimes do in the middle of a promising conversation is to stop having it for a while and let the information settle. He asked Emily to arrange lunch from a restaurant 2 blocks over, Kindred, which was the kind of place that took food seriously enough that bringing it into a business meeting communicated a specific level of respect. He asked Andre if he had any dietary preferences. Andre said no, and then, almost as an afterthought, said he was partial to anything with good collard greens if they had it. Richard noted this and passed it to Emily without comment, while the team dispersed to their phones and laptops and the quiet individual recalibrations that people make when a meeting has gone better or worse than expected. Richard stayed in the conference room with Andre. They sat for a moment in the easy silence of 2 people who have just done something substantive together and are resting in the shared weight of it. Richard said, "Tell me about the early years." Andre leaned back in his chair. It was the particular lean of a man who is comfortable enough to take up a little more space in a room than he had been when he first sat down. "Gastonia," he said. "Born and raised. My father was a mechanic, worked at a Chevy dealership for 30 years. Not because he loved Chevys especially, just because that was where the work was when he was starting out. He was good at it. He retired as the senior technician on staff. They gave him a watch. Did he want more? Andre considered this with a seriousness the question deserved. I think he wanted what he had. He loved the work. He was respected in that shop. He put 2 kids through college on that salary. He wasn't spending his life wishing he was somewhere else. A brief pause. But I think he also saw something in me that was restless in a way he wasn't. And he pushed on it. He's the one who told me to study engineering, not just turn wrenches. Did you always want your own business? Not always. For a while, I thought I'd go work for a manufacturer. I had a job offer from a company in Stuttgart at 26 that would have been a serious career. I came close to taking it. Andre's gaze went briefly toward the window, the Charlotte skyline, then came back. But I had a client at the time. Small restoration project. A 1973 Porsche 911 that needed a full engine rebuild. I finished that job and the owner picked it up and drove away. And I stood in the garage watching him go, and I thought, there is nothing in Stuttgart that is going to feel like that. So I stayed. Richard was quiet for a moment. You mentioned earlier that you were servicing clients in 12 states. When did you stop thinking of Carter Performance as a local shop? Year 5, Andre said. We had a client fly a car in from Atlanta on a flatbed because someone in his network told him we were the only shop in the region he trusted with it. That was a Ferrari 488 with a warranty situation that the dealership wouldn't touch. We fixed it, documented everything, provided a full engineering report, and sent it back. 2 weeks later, we had 4 new inquiries from clients in other states. I realized at that point that the market for what we do is not geographic. It's reputational. How do you protect the reputation at scale? Richard asked. Standards, Andre said simply. Every technician we hire goes through our internal certification process, regardless of prior experience. Not because I doubt their experience, because I want every person in that building to do things our way. And our way is documented and tested and corrected over 11 years. I do not compromise on that. Not for speed, not for volume, not for any business reason. The reputation is the business. If the reputation goes, everything goes. Richard nodded slowly. He had built Crown Elite on a similar principle, expressed differently, but fundamentally the same. The business is the name. The name is the standard. You maintain the standard or you don't have a name. I want to ask you something, Richard said, and I want you to answer it honestly, because I think you're the kind of person who does that. Andre waited. When you walked back in here this morning, after what happened downstairs, what were you thinking? The question sat between them for a moment. I was thinking, Andre said carefully, that the person who made that call doesn't represent the whole company, and that the person standing in the parking lot who ran out to get me might, and that the only fair way to find out was to come back in and do the meeting. Richard was quiet. I've been turned away from rooms like this before, Andre continued. Not always for the same reason. Sometimes it was the uniform, sometimes it was something else. But I made a decision early on that I was not going to let anyone else's judgment about me become mine. My father taught me that. He said, son, don't let somebody else's bad manners become your bad day. Richard looked at him for a long moment. Your father sounds like a very wise man, he said. He was, Andre said. And then, quietly, he passed 2 years ago. I'm sorry. He knew the business was doing well by then, Andre said. That matters to me. The door opened, and Emily came in ahead of the catering delivery, and the moment between them shifted naturally into the practical business of getting lunch organized and people back in their seats. But Richard carried what Andre had said with him through the rest of the afternoon, the way you carry something that has changed the weight of a conversation without either person having quite named it. By 2 in the afternoon, the conference room had the particular energy of a meeting that has crossed some invisible threshold from formal to productive. Jackets were off. Laptops were open. Helen Brooks had covered 3 pages of her legal pad with figures and had started on a 4th. Marcus Webb and Andre had been deep in a technical exchange for the better part of 40 minutes, during which the rest of the room had largely listened because the conversation had moved into a register of precision that required a certain fluency to follow. They were talking about the Porsche PDK transmission calibration sequence for the 992 generation GT3, and specifically about a known issue with the software handshake between the gearbox control unit and the engine management system that produced a surge under certain load conditions. And Andre had described a calibration protocol that his team had developed in-house over 2 years of testing that eliminated the issue without voiding the manufacturer warranty. Marcus had heard of the issue. He had not heard of the solution. "This is documented?" Marcus asked. "Fully," Andre said. "I can have the technical documentation sent over this week. We've had the fix validated by an independent engineering firm in Munich. It's not manufacturer approved yet, but we've submitted it through the formal technical service bulletin process. We're expecting acceptance within the next 18 months. You submitted it to Porsche directly." "We did?" "And to McLaren, for a related issue, on the 765 LT. Andre paused. "We work with the manufacturers, not around them. That's another principle." Marcus sat back and looked at Richard in a way that communicated, across the table, something specific and immediate. Richard received it and gave a small nod in return. Helen Brooks looked up from her legal pad. "Mr. Carter, the partnership structure you've outlined includes a provision for exclusivity within the Southeast region. Can you speak to the parameters of that?" Andre turned to the relevant section of his proposal. "What we're offering is operational exclusivity for the performance service category within your network's Southeast footprint. We would not partner with a competing dealership group in this region for a period of 7 years under the proposed terms. In return, we're asking for a minimum service volume commitment and access to your customer data for the vehicles in scope, so that we can build out preventive maintenance scheduling and avoid reactive service situations." 7 years is a long commitment, Helen said. "From our side." "It is," Andre agreed. "That's intentional. What I'm proposing is not a vendor relationship. It's a structural integration. It takes time to do correctly, and both parties need to have genuine commitment to the timeline for it to work. If 7 years makes you uncomfortable, I'm open to a conversation about the terms. But I'll tell you that the value I'm describing doesn't fully materialize in the first 2 years. It materializes in years 3 through 7, when the systems are embedded, the training is complete, and the diagnostic protocols are second nature to your teams. That's where the real return on the investment lives." Daniel Chu had been quiet for a while, which was his way of processing. He looked up now. "The data access provision. How are you thinking about that structurally? From a privacy and systems architecture standpoint?" "I have a data governance framework drafted," Andre said. "It limits access to vehicle-level diagnostic and service history only. No customer personal data without specific consent and a separate data sharing agreement. We're GDPR aligned even in the US context, because we have clients in businesses with European operations, and I decided early that the more protective standard was the right baseline." Daniel looked at his laptop. He typed something. He nodded slowly. Emily Ross, from her chair near the door, had stopped pretending she was only there to manage logistics and was now fully and openly listening. She had been in dozens of these meetings in her 6 years at Crown Elite, and she had developed a reliable sense for the ones that would result in a contract and the ones that would result in a polite follow-up email and a quiet decline. This one had crossed that line definitively, she estimated, somewhere around 11:45, when Marcus Webb had leaned forward and stopped asking challenging questions and started asking clarifying questions. The shift from challenge to clarification, that was the signal. At 2:30, Richard suggested they take a short break before the final segment of the meeting. People stood, stretched, moved toward the windows and the hallway and the small kitchen down the corridor. Andre stood at the window and looked at the city. He had grown up 90 minutes from here and had moved to Charlotte at 23, and he knew this skyline in the particular way that people know the skylines of cities they chose, rather than cities they were born in. The choice carried a different kind of ownership. Emily appeared at his shoulder, not crowding, just present. "That went well," she said. "It did," Andre agreed. A short silence. "For what it's worth," Emily said, "I want to apologize for this morning. I saw it happening, and I didn't stop it fast enough. Andre turned slightly toward her. Did you know who I was? I figured it out about 30 seconds in, she said. I should have stepped in immediately. Andre looked at her. The fact that you're saying this now means something, he said. I appreciate it. Emily nodded. She started to move away, then turned back. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you come back in? You had every reason to leave. You could have called Richard from your truck and had a conversation that would have been very uncomfortable for this company, and very justified. Andre thought about this for a moment. Because I'm not in the business of making people uncomfortable, he said. I'm in the business of building engines, and an engine that's running hot needs to be diagnosed and fixed, not just let it blow. He paused. Besides, the contract would have been harder to sign from the parking lot. Emily laughed, surprised by it. The clean and genuine laugh of someone who was not expecting to be amused. Andre smiled, the first full smile he had allowed himself since arriving that morning. At 3:15, Richard Coleman called everyone back into the conference room and asked Emily to also bring Kevin Lawson upstairs. This was not on the original agenda. Kevin came into a room that was already seated and settled, and the difference in the atmosphere from the morning showroom confrontation was complete and disorienting. The conference table was covered in documents and open laptops. Empty lunch containers had been cleared. The view through the north windows showed Charlotte in the flat gold light of a mid-afternoon in spring. The executive team looked comfortable in the way that people look when a meeting has gone well and they know it. Kevin took a seat near the door, which was the natural instinct of someone who expected to leave soon. Richard did not begin with an accusation. He had thought about this moment during the lunch break, and had decided that the most useful thing he could do was not to make it about the morning alone, but about something larger. Because if the morning was only about Kevin, the problem would stay small and the fix would stay small. And Richard did not want a small fix. Kevin, he said, I asked you to come up here because what happened this morning is something I want to address directly and in front of the people who were in this meeting. Not to embarrass you, but because I think what happened is bigger than one decision. And the people who need to understand that are the ones in this room. Kevin sat straight. His jaw was set in the way of a man who is prepared to absorb something difficult. Richard continued. You made a judgment call this morning based on incomplete information. You saw a man in work clothes in the showroom and you made an assumption about why he was there and what he was entitled to. The assumption was wrong. Not just factually wrong, but wrong in a deeper way. And the fact that it was a wrong assumption that a reasonable person might have made in the same moment is exactly why we need to talk about it. He paused. Andre Carter, who is sitting at this table, he is one of the most respected automotive engineers in this country. He flew no flag this morning to tell you that. He wore no badge. He made no demand. He showed you an email confirmation of his appointment. You didn't take it, and you asked him to leave. Richard's voice was even and deliberate, and then he walked out to his truck and was preparing to drive away from a partnership that represents one of the most significant opportunities this company has seen in a decade. The room was very still. Kevin looked at Andre. Andre looked back at him without expression, open and unreadable. What I want to say to this team, Richard continued, turning to include everyone, is that this is not about what Kevin did. It's about what we, as a company, have either built or failed to build in our culture. If the instinct in our organization is to make judgments about who belongs based on what they're wearing, that's a structural problem. And structural problems don't get fixed by disciplining one person. They get fixed by changing the structure. Helen Brooks had set down her pen. Marcus Webb was watching Richard with the attention of someone hearing the person they work for say something they fully mean. Richard turned back to Kevin. I'm not here to tell you you're a bad person. I don't believe that. I believe you acted on instinct and the instinct was wrong, and I want to tell you that directly so that we can move forward from it properly. Kevin was quiet for a moment. His hands were on the table in front of him, and he was looking at them. Then, he looked up at Andre. Mr. Carter, he said. His voice was steady, but required some work to get there. I made a wrong call this morning. I didn't ask you who you were. I didn't read the confirmation you offered me. I made an assumption and I acted on it. And what I did was disrespectful. I'm sorry. The apology was not elaborate. It did not try to explain or contextualize. It was the kind of apology that is effective precisely because it carries no structural weight beyond the acknowledgement itself. Andre held Kevin's gaze for a moment. "I accept that," Andre said, "and I appreciate it. Let's move forward." He said it the way a man says something he genuinely means, without additional weight, without the performance of magnanimity, simply the statement of someone who has decided to take the apology at face value and proceed. Kevin nodded. Something in his posture shifted slightly. The specific release of a man who has been carrying a weight and has been permitted to set it down. Richard let the silence hold for just a beat, then moved the meeting forward. "What I want to discuss in the next hour," he said, "is how we take what Andre has proposed and what this morning demonstrated and turn both of them into something lasting. Not just a contract, a change." He looked around the table. Emily has been taking notes all morning on the culture side of this. Marcus and Helen have the financial framework in front of them. And Andre has one condition he hasn't told us yet that I'd like him to share before we finalize anything. He looked at Andre. Andre rested his hands on the table in front of him. "One condition," he said, "beyond the commercial terms, which I think we're close on. My condition is this. Every employee of Crown Elite, regardless of role or seniority, including executive level, spends 1 day per year working alongside the technicians at my shop. Not observing, working, learning what the work is." Silence. "The reason," Andre continued, "is simple. You cannot value what you don't understand. The technician who rebuilds a McLaren engine spends 18 hours on a single job. The person who greets a client in the showroom needs to know what 18 hours on a single job feels like. Not so they can do the technical work, so they can understand the human being who does it." He paused. "That is my condition. It's non-negotiable." The room sat with it. Then Marcus Webb said, "I'll go first." And Emily Ross from her chair said, "Second." The formal partnership agreement between Crown Elite Motors and Carter Performance Engineering was signed 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in May, in the same conference room where the negotiation had begun. The signing was not a ceremony with photographers and press releases, because Andre had asked for it not to be. He had told Richard, in one of the working calls they had in the intervening weeks, that he preferred to let the work be the announcement. Richard had agreed immediately and noted privately that this was one more indicator that he had made the right choice. The terms were substantial. A 7-year partnership covering all 14 Crown Elite locations in the Southeast region. A guaranteed minimum service volume that ensured Carter Performance Engineering's financial stability for the duration. Integration of Carter's diagnostic systems into Crown Elite's service departments, with a technician training program that Andre's team would run over the first 18 months. And the condition, written into the agreement as a formal requirement, 1 day per year for every Crown Elite employee at Carter Performance Engineering. The total value of the contract, across the 7-year term, was in excess of $30 million. Andre sat across from Richard and the legal teams and signed his name in 3 places. Then he put the pen down and looked out the window for a moment at the Charlotte skyline in May light, and he thought about his father and about the garage in Gastonia, and about a 22-year-old who was rebuilding Ferraris with borrowed tools and a degree he was finishing at night. He thought about his father saying, "Do good work, that's all. Just do good work." He picked up his coffee cup and held it briefly. Richard noticed and said, "Something on your mind?" "Just thinking about my father," Andre said. "He would have liked this." Richard nodded. "Tell me something about him." Andre thought for a moment. "He used to say that the people who treat you worst will learn the most from you if you stay composed. He didn't mean it as a strategy. He meant it as a philosophy. Like, the way you carry yourself when things go wrong is the truest version of who you are." Richard was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Your father was the kind of man this business needs more of." "Most businesses do," Andre said. The legal team finished their portion of the paperwork. Richard's assistant came in with a bottle of sparkling water and glasses, a small and genuine gesture that Richard had specified rather than the champagne that would have been the default, because it was 11 in the morning and he respected people's various relationships with alcohol. They clinked glasses. It was a modest moment, deliberately so, and entirely appropriate. Emily Ross was there. Marcus Webb was there. Helen Brooks was there. Daniel Chu was there. And Kevin Lawson, who had been invited because Richard had decided that the people who witnessed the problem should also witness the resolution, was there, standing near the door with his hands folded in front of him and a look on his face that was equal parts discomfort, and something he would, if pressed, have admitted was the beginning of something like respect. After the signing, as people began to disperse, Kevin approached Andre in the hallway outside the conference room. He had spent the 6 intervening weeks thinking about the morning of the meeting in a way that had been uncomfortable and clarifying in roughly equal measure. "Mr. Carter," he said. Andre turned. "I wanted to say something more than what I said in there during the meeting," Kevin said, "because I've been thinking about it a lot. I looked up your company after that day, read the articles, saw the work, and I realized that even if you hadn't been who you are, even if you'd just been a regular person who came in off the street to buy a car and dressed the way you did, what I did would have been wrong. It wasn't wrong because you turned out to be important. It was wrong because of how I treated you." Andre looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most important thing you've said," Andre told him. "And I mean that." Kevin nodded. He extended his hand. Andre took it. They shook, and both men understood that the handshake was not a performance for anyone watching. It was two people clearing the air between them in the specific way that clearing the air requires. Direct, acknowledged, done. 7 months later, Carter Performance Engineering hosted its first Crown Elite Employee Immersion Day. It was a Tuesday in October, and Charlotte was in the full copper and gold of autumn. The temperature in the mid-60s, the sky a shade of blue that Andre particularly associated with good work days. The kind of day when the air coming through the shop doors felt like it wanted to be there. 12 Crown Elite employees arrived at 7 in the morning. They were a cross-section of the organization. By design, Richard and Emily had put the group together to ensure it included every level of the company structure: a finance coordinator and a senior director, 2 showroom sales associates and the VP of operations, a receptionist who had worked the front desk for 9 years, and a regional manager who oversaw 3 locations. Kevin Lawson was in the group. They were each issued coveralls. Andre's team had ordered them specially, Carter Performance Engineering Blue, with the employee's name embroidered on the left chest in white thread. Kevin put his on in the changing area alongside Marcus Webb, who was in the coveralls with the particular self-consciousness of someone doing something unfamiliar in a professional context. Kevin looked at his reflection briefly in the small mirror by the lockers. He thought about Andre walking into the Crown Elite showroom in his blue coveralls 7 months ago. He thought about the 2 seconds he had spent on that visual before making his decision. He thought about what those 2 seconds had almost cost everyone. He tucked the collar of his coveralls down and went to join the group. Andre was waiting for them in the main bay. Carter Performance Engineering looked like what it was, a precision operation that took its work very seriously. The floor was cleaner than most restaurants. Every tool had a designated space and was in it. The lighting was industrial but bright and carefully positioned. 3 cars were in various stages of work: a Lamborghini Huracan with its engine mid-removal, a 2022 Porsche 911 GT3 on a hydraulic lift with its wheels off, and a Ferrari 812 Superfast with its dashboard out and wiring looms spread across a clean workbench like the circulatory system of something enormous. The Crown Elite group stood together and looked at it all with the specific silence of people encountering a world they knew existed but had not seen up close. Andre addressed them without notes. "Welcome to Carter Performance Engineering. You are going to spend today doing real work on real vehicles. You are not going to be observers. You are going to be participants. By the end of the day, your hands will be dirty, your back will be tired, and you will understand something about this work that you cannot get from reading about it or talking about it." He paused. "My team is here to teach you. Ask every question you have. There are no questions that are too basic. The only way to understand something is to ask about it. And the only people who don't ask are the ones who are too worried about appearing smart to become smart. He looked at the group. The reason this day is in our agreement is not because I wanted a contractual obligation. It's because I believe, genuinely, that the people who interact with our clients and our vehicles every day will do their jobs better when they understand the full story of what those vehicles are and what it takes to care for them. He paused again. And because I believe that when you respect the work, you respect the people who do it. He let that land. Then he said, "Let's get started." The morning was, for most of the Crown Elite employees, something they did not have adequate language for before they experienced it. The finance coordinator, whose name was Grace, spent 2 hours learning the basics of brake rotor inspection alongside a Carter technician named Darnell, who had been with the shop for 7 years, and at some point in the second hour she stopped thinking about the inspection in terms of the abstraction of a balance sheet line and started thinking about the physical reality of a vehicle stopping or not stopping, and the person inside it, and the connection between those two things, the number and. The consequence became different in some essential way. The regional manager, whose name was Tom and who had 20 years in automotive retail, spent the morning on the Porsche GT3 with Marcus Webb, both of them learning from a Carter engineer named Sophia how the active aerodynamic system communicated with the suspension control unit. And Tom, who prided himself on knowing his product, discovered multiple things he had not known, and the experience of not knowing them in the presence of someone who did know them and explained them patiently and without condescension was disarming in a way he had not expected. Kevin was assigned to the Ferrari. His teacher was a Carter technician named James, 29 years old, who had grown up in Gastonia, the same town Andre was from, and who had come to Carter Performance Engineering at 23 after seeing an article about the shop in a local automotive magazine. James explained what they were doing with the wiring diagnostic, what they were looking for, how the system communicated error codes, what each code meant, and what it pointed to in the physical architecture of the car. Kevin listened with the full attention of someone who had no prior frame of reference and therefore had no shortcuts to fall back on. He asked questions. James answered them in plain language, patient and thorough. And somewhere in the middle of the morning, Kevin found himself thinking about something Andre had said in the conference room 7 months ago. You cannot value what you don't understand. At lunch, which was ordered in and eaten on folding tables set up in the shop bay alongside the vehicles, the conversation was the kind of conversation that happens when different people from different parts of an organization are placed in an unfamiliar environment and do something physically demanding together. It was looser than office conversation, more direct. The hierarchies that structure professional interaction had softened under the weight of shared physical experience and the equalizing effect of identical blue coveralls. Richard Coleman was not there. He had decided deliberately not to attend the first immersion day because he did not want his presence to create a performance dynamic where people behaved for the boss rather than for themselves. He would attend the second one, the following year, as a participant. But he had sent a message that morning, which Andre read to the group before lunch. To everyone participating in today's immersion, what happens at Carter Performance Engineering today is not a team-building exercise. It is a statement about what we believe. We believe that work is dignified regardless of where it happens or who performs it. We believe that understanding creates respect, and that respect is the foundation of everything worth building. Learn something real today. After lunch, the afternoon was more relaxed. The formal instruction gave way to open exploration. People drifting between the different vehicles and technicians, asking follow-up questions, trying small tasks under supervision, handling tools, learning what things weighed and what they resisted, and what they required. Kevin spent part of the afternoon sitting with Andre at a workbench at the back of the shop, where Andre was doing a calibration check on a diagnostic module. They were not having a deep conversation. They were doing a task together, or rather, Kevin was watching and occasionally handing Andre things and asking what they were for. At some point, Kevin said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," Andre said without looking up from the calibration display. "When you were standing in the parking lot that morning with your keys, about to drive away. What would you have done if Coleman hadn't come out? Andre was quiet for a moment. The calibration display scrolled data. He watched it. I would have driven away, he said. I would have called Richard's assistant and said the meeting didn't work out and that I wished them well. Kevin absorbed this. And the partnership? Kevin asked. Gone, Andre said simply. It wouldn't have happened. Not because I would have been angry about it forever, but because a partner is someone you trust, and trust needs a certain foundation. The foundation wasn't there yet. Kevin was quiet for a while. I almost cost you $30 million, he said. Not as a question, not as self-flagellation, just as a statement of fact that he was saying out loud to make it real. You did, Andre said. He finally looked up from the display. And you didn't, because Coleman ran, and because I decided to come back in. He picked up a calibration tool and continued his work. The thing about most mistakes, Andre said, is that they're recoverable. The question is whether the people involved are willing to do the recovery. Most of the time they are. People are better than the worst thing they do in any given moment. That's been my experience. Kevin looked at him. Is that what your father taught you? He asked. Andre considered this. Then he smiled. The full and genuine smile that the people closest to him knew as the truest expression of who he was. Among other things, he said. Among other things. At 4:30, the group gathered in the main bay for a closing conversation that Andre kept short by design. You worked today, he said. That matters. Not the hours, not the complexity of what you did, not how much you learned technically. What matters is that you showed up and engaged with work that is different from your own work. And you took it seriously. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. He looked at the group. 12 people in blue coveralls with the Carter Performance Engineering logo on their chests. Tired in the way of people who have done physical things with their hands and their attention. This company, he said, and he meant both companies when he said it, is going to work well because the people in it understand each other. Not perfectly, not all at once, but over time and with intention, and with the willingness to keep showing up. He paused. I'll see you next October. The group dispersed in the warm October late afternoon, back to their cars, back to their usual lives, carrying something they had not arrived with that morning. Not a lesson, exactly. Not a moral. More like a recalibration. A small shift in the internal instrument that determines how one perceives the people around them. Richard Coleman received their reports later that evening. In formal summaries, he had asked each participant to send in a few sentences after the day. He read all 12. Some were 2 sentences long. Some were several paragraphs. All of them said some version of the same thing. The work is harder than I understood. The people who do it are worth more than I had given them credit for. I will not make that mistake again. He set his phone down on his desk and looked at the Charlotte skyline through his office window. The city settling into evening, lights coming on across the towers and the neighborhoods, the whole spread of a place full of people doing the work of their lives. He thought about a man in blue coveralls standing in a parking lot with his keys, about to drive away. He thought about running. He thought about the particular 30 seconds in which everything could have gone differently. And he was grateful, with the specific and uncomplicated gratitude of someone who got something right at the last possible moment, that he had run. Character, Andre had said, is the truest version of who you are. Richard Coleman turned off his office light. Tomorrow, the work continued.